Hello, I'm Harold Monroe, editor-in-chief at the Vancouver Sun and Province. And joining me is Daphne Brahma, our columnist for the Vancouver Sun. Well, Daphne, end of a long night, of a long campaign, and we're back where we started, at least so far. What did you what did you make of tonight's results?
Well, I mean, the people that I spoke to before the election, because we're saying things like, oh, the pollsters never get it right. Well, I mean, let's do a little bit of a shout out to the pollsters. They did tell us that that's what it appeared was going to be happening. That was the probability. Um, so it was no big surprise. I think there are a few small surprises. Um, I it was I was surprised, I guess. At the very end of the night, I was surprised by how ungracious Aaron O'Toole was in his speech. It reminded me a bit of Andrew Scheer's speech at the end of the last campaign. It seems that Mr. O'Toole seemed to be running to be starting the next campaign and blaming Justin Trudeau for a campaign that is starting before just as the last one ended. And I think if anything, one should take from that Aaron O'Toole is really running for his own job again. And certainly that's what Andrew Scheer tried to do and didn't do it successfully. So it'll be interesting to see whether Mr. O'Toole is able to do that. He did make major changes to the party. He talked about it not being your father's Conservative Party. He chose to campaign with Brian Mulroney. We didn't see Stephen Harper. And clearly the rise, I think, of the PPC, the nearly doubling of their support, is a reflection that there were a lot of disaffected Conservative voters who would have gone to that party.
Right. I would imagine, though, he has a lot to answer for in not making inroads in Metro Toronto, Metro Vancouver. In fact, as it stands now, perhaps losing a couple of seats in Metro Vancouver, at least.
Well, and I think that going early on in the election when the Liberals were stumbling quite badly, it really did look like it could very well have been a Tory minority, and there were even at some points thoughts that it could be a Tory majority. So Mr. O'Toole has to wear that. I don't think he was helped at all by what's happened in Alberta and Jason Kenney, because they lost a couple of seats there, and I think for Canadians who are quite often buy into the Conservatives are scary rhetoric. I think when they're seeing what's happening in Alberta and Saskatchewan as well, with these desperately bad numbers on COVID, I think they decided that the Liberals and supported by the NDP did well in COVID, and maybe we just better stick with the devil we know.
That's interesting. It's also relative, right? Because BC has triple the caseloads of Ontario and Quebec right now, and then of course Alberta has triple BC. So it really does depend on where you are at any one point. Well, it wasn't that long ago when Quebec was the problem. So it's
yeah. I mean, Saskatchewan is really quite scary. I heard
yes.
Murray Mandrick, my colleague from the Regina Leader Post, this earlier today, and he was saying that they have almost the same number of cases as Ontario, which has 13 times the population of Saskatchewan.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So I think the underlying theme of this campaign really was the pandemic, and it was to some extent a referendum on how the previous government did dealing with the pandemic. There were, of course, other issues. People, of course, are concerned about housing and all of those things, but the underlying, I think, vote seems to have been, we'll stick with the status quo. We don't quite trust any of you to go it on your own.
Looks like the NDP are going to pick up a couple of seats and maybe a percentage point or two, but not perhaps the breakthrough that Mr. Singh was hoping for the second time around.
Well, I mean, he's a funny one to watch, because I remember in 2019, it was like he'd won this gigantic victory, and he in fact lost seats. I mean,
Yes.
he's good. He's very good at selling us on good news. I mean, he picked up 3 seats, but we're not even sure that he's got those 3 seats. And
Right.
you know, this is one of the things. It's very close. It is a. I think it will be a Liberal minority, but it remains to be seen yet whether the party with the next the party the it remains to be seen whether or not the NDP actually can pick up enough seats that they have more than the Bloc Québécois. And I think in some ways you can see it as not a win for the NDP when the Bloc Québécois have more seats than they do.
Right. Well, it looks like the Bloc, at this point at least, are going to be around the same number, 32, and the NDP are going to be, as you say, depending on whether they can pick up 2 or 3, somewhere in the 25 to 26, maybe 27 range. So well short of Bloc at this point.
I thought it was very interesting too that Mr. Blanchette, the leader of the BQ, was very gracious. He spoke about doing what's best for Quebec, but he said in the time of a pandemic, we're going to do what's best for all of us. We plan to work together. We don't plan to disrupt Parliament. We hope that what is good for Quebecers may also be good for Canada, but obviously Quebecers come first. And I thought that was quite a gracious speech, and certainly suggests a willingness that he is willing to work with a Liberal minority government as well. So I think that certainly strengthens the hand of the Liberals, knowing that they could get Bloc support, as they did in the past, for certain measures if they can't always rely on the NDP.
And then where do you think this leaves the Green Party? We know, they did have dysfunction before the campaign and through the campaign. They really got decimated here, down from 6.5% 2 years ago to just over 2% at last count here.
But they picked up a seat in Kitchener Waterloo. I mean, of all places, it seemed like an unlikely one.
Well, that's true. To win a seat in Ontario is a big deal for them, but it does appear they're going to lose their one of their seats on the island, right? The Nanaimo.
Yes, it looks like Paul Manley's not going to make it in that seat, right. And so it goes back to really being Elizabeth May's party. So they're obviously going to have to look for a new leader, I think, because Anna May Paul, well, she speaks so well, she presents so well. Apparently, doesn't work well with other people. She was essentially she was decimated in her riding. She ran second in the by-election, was absolutely decimated. And so they'll be looking for a new leader. I don't know where they go from here. It seems that with the Liberals, the Liberals have really moved into their space in a big way. To get someone like Andrew Weaver to endorse your platform and as effusively as he did, certainly must give comfort to some people who have climate change and the environment as their major issue.
BC Premier John Horgan stayed comfortably on the sidelines throughout this campaign. So he comes out of this in pretty good shape. He had a good relationship with Justin Trudeau before the election. That shouldn't change, I don't expect.
No, and I think he wisely stayed out of the election. Yes. If you recall, again in 2019, Doug Ford got quite heavily involved in the election, and he actually tipped the balance in Ontario, I think, for the Liberals the last time. So I think premiers can be as much a liability as anything. I mean, there was people have been talking about how in Manitoba the premier there was a bit of a liability as well for the Conservatives this time. And certainly, Jason Kenney, he did campaign a lot in 2019, and boy, good thing he went away for a few weeks of holidays but then he came back and, COVID overtook them. So, no, I think it's good that premiers stay out of the way. I think the other, closer to home, I think it's, we saw some interesting races here, and we're going to have to wait to see. It looks like wait to see who does end up on top in that Vancouver Granville riding, which we were interested in all along. And there's another one that's too close to call. That Kootenai, Columbia one was too close to call when last I looked. And then there are a couple of other odd ones. Richmond Center looks like it flipped to the Liberals from the Conservatives. And also Steveston, Richmond East. And those two ridings both had Conservatives in them. And in that riding, there was a lot of chatter in social media, Chinese social media, about don't vote for the Conservatives. They're too tough on China. Vote for the Liberals. They've got a better policy. And certainly Kenny Chu in Steveston, Richmond East was targeted for introducing a bill which would require people who are former government officials to register if they're going to lobby on behalf of a foreign government. So it'll be interesting to kind of read some of the tea leaves on what really happened in those ridings and what happened to other Chinese Canadian candidates across the country to see whether there was some fallout from that kind of social media action.
And it looks like we talked earlier about West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky. It does look like the Liberals are going to hold on to that one.
It looks like it. Again, it was a very tight one, and unfortunately, I didn't see anywhere. I haven't seen anywhere the percentage of the PPC vote, which would be interesting too to see how much the PPC might have cut into the Conservatives vote.
Right.
Interestingly,
well, it's about, I guess, if you add
Lewis,
the Conservative and PPC vote together, it would be about the same number of votes as the Liberal, the way it stands right now.
Yeah,
but you couldn't count on
and
that. Yeah.
And interestingly, at the beginning of every campaign, they talk about the star candidates. Well, Avi Lewis's star quality, maybe he ran in the wrong riding because he didn't seem to get much traction here. But again, I think that some of that has to do with Andrew Weaver coming out and supporting the liberal policies on climate change and supporting Mr. Weiler, the incumbent there for the Liberals.
And it could be some time before we know what's going to happen in Vancouver, Granville.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It was also interesting to see Jody Wilson-Raybould as one of the commentators on CTV. So
I didn't see that. Okay.
So anyway, she seems to be keeping a very high profile, obviously. But anyway, yes, Vancouver. We'll wait for those few ridings, and I think one of the things too that people should think about is almost a final thing on this to close the door on this is there were so many candidates that were running in this election that had such interesting resumes, were so well qualified, so they gave up so much to actually run and put themselves on the line. And we did see some a more angry crowd. I think we saw more divisions and more anger this time. And I think that people should just be grateful that we live in a country where people are willing to put themselves on the line. And and a shout out to all those people in Ontario that stood in polling lines for hours and hours. Some of them would have been casting their ballot at close to 1 o'clock in the morning. And so, it may be a more divided country, as some people are saying, because of the rise of the PPC, because of these things. But honestly, we are really quite blessed in this country with strong institutions, people who are still willing to run, and people still willing to vote. And so our government is strong, and that's a good thing.
That's a great way to end it. I totally agree with you. I think we owe a debt of gratitude to anyone who stands for public office these days, the scrutiny they come under, the social media attacks. So thanks to everyone who ran. And in the coming days, we'll see how the final numbers work out here. Still got a lot to write about, and you'll have a lot to write about in the days ahead. Thanks, Daphne.
Thank you.